This is the Scoot on the Air YouTube channel. And I'm Scoot, and I appreciate you tuning in tonight. If you haven't become a subscriber, I hope you will subscribe. It's real simple. Just be a subscriber, and we are supposed to give you an alert every time we do something new. And this is the very beginning of this channel. This is going to be building. And all of this is an extension of my radio show on WWL Radio in New Orleans. It just gives us a little more time and space to expand on some things. So we're going to add graphics and we're going to add things as time goes on. But thanks to those of you who have become subscribers, it's free. But we're just building this, and I love that you're part of the beginning. So I want to talk about briefly what Liz Cheney did today and how it's very similar to what Bob Dylan did on this day in 1963. Liz Cheney, what did she do today? Or what has she been doing? She stood up for what she believed in. She didn't bend to pressure to conform. She stood up for what she believed in. And what she believed in is something that everybody should believe in, which is former President Trump is former President Trump because he lost the election. And there are still people going around saying he really won. And somewhere embedded in their brains is this thought that he really did win. They've convinced themselves, or they've been brainwashed by others to be absolutely convinced that Trump won the election. And we know he didn't. And there's no evidence to the contrary. The other thing that Liz Cheney did was that she was honest about what Trump supporters did on January the 6th. It was an insurrection. And today the House was holding hearings on that. And there were people who, it was a poop show. It was grandstanding on both sides. So I applaud Liz Cheney. Liz Cheney, a conservative Republican, stood up for what she believed in, which was the truth, which was law and order. And anybody that buys into the big lie and that doesn't see what really happened January the 6th, they're not conservative Republicans. And they're not accepting the truth. On this day, May the 12th, 1963, Bob Dylan refused to perform on The Ed Sullivan Show. Now, for you millennials, Zoomers, The Ed Sullivan Show was a variety show. It was one of the top-rated shows at the time. And this was the show that introduced the Beatles and Elvis and a lot of other groups, a lot of other, early performers. But it was a variety show. We don't have those anymore, but it was a variety show. They had jugglers, they had singers, they had rock bands, they had establishment singers, dancers, and different things. Comedians sometimes. So it was a true variety show. But Bob Dylan was prepared to perform on The Ed Sullivan Show, and he was going to play the song John Birch, Paranoid Blues. The John Birch Society was a right-wing extreme organization that tried to label everybody communist. And they were paranoid about communism. Communism's coming. Communism's coming across the border. Look, there were people who back in 1963, they thought communism was going to come up through Mexico and reach the border. And they thought that a long time ago, the border problem was going to be because communists were coming over the border, not people from Central America and Mexico. No, they thought communists were going to come across the border. So John Birch was this right-wing group, and Bob Dylan's song is critical of John Birch Society. So Dylan is ready to perform, and the show tells him, no, you can't. You can't perform that song. You can perform another song, but you can't perform the song Talking John Birch Paranoid Blues. And so what Bob Dylan did was he said, and look, Bob Dylan was big in the folk scene in New York City. And he was, big in kind of the hippie folk scene. This was 1963. This was before the Beatles and the British invasion. And Bob Dylan was one of the early anti-establishment voices. And there was like kind of a folk scene, coffee houses and a folk scene. Bob Dylan was part of that. So This would have given him huge exposure to be on the Ed Sullivan Show. And Bob Dylan said no. If you don't let me sing the song that I'm prepared to sing, I'm not doing it. And he refused to do it. And he gave up the opportunity for all that publicity to stick to what he believed in, to stick to his morals and his beliefs. He never performed on the Ed Sullivan Show. And he did benefit tremendously from refusing to perform because it brought him a lot of attention. And I respect that. I respect that of Liz Cheney. I respect that of Bob Dylan in 1963. But it also just kind of brings us back to some of the early years of the Ed Sullivan Show and early variety shows and some of the rules that they had. So this is kind of the real story behind some of this. You know, Elvis Presley, now, relative to today, I mean, look, you compare Elvis Presley to, say, Nicki Minaj or anybody today. Cardi B would be a great example. Elvis Presley was seen as the Cardi B of his time. Why? Because he gyrated his hips, and the gyrating of his hips suggested a gyrating, thrusting motion of the pelvic region of the body. You didn't do that back then. So the networks only showed Elvis from the waist up. They stopped showing him below the waist. So you could not see the pelvic thrusting. Because in those times, that was considered too sexual. And look where we are today with Cardi B. Also, the Rolling Stones were to perform. Well, they did perform on the Ed Sullivan Show. And the song Let's Spend the Night Together, the censors requested, and they did, the censors requested that they change the lyrics because, again, this would have been 1964. So in 1964, the Stones were not allowed to sing Let's Spend the Night Together because it implied sex. Spend the night with me, basically have sex with me. Let's have sex together tonight was really the meaning behind let's spend the night together. Well, that wasn't tolerated in 1964. And so the censors told Mick Jagger he had to sing the song, Let's Spend Some Time Together. And if I'm not mistaken, Mick Jagger followed along and did exactly that. And then we come to Jim Morrison and the Doors and the song Light My Fire. And the censors were so freaked out over the line, Light My Fire, girl, we couldn't get much higher because it implied drug use. Girl, we couldn't get much higher. And, you know, people were smoking pot and LSD, and the idea of promoting drugs, and that's what they thought at the time, was unacceptable. So they told Jim Morrison to change the lyrics. I don't remember what they told him to change the lyrics to, but Jim Morrison didn't change the lyrics. And he got on the Ed Sullivan Show, and he emphasized, girl, we couldn't get much higher. And it was live, so they couldn't do anything about it. But it's just amazing at what was deemed so inappropriate then compared to today. And, you know, you have to wonder if the day is going to come when Cardi B is going to be seen like Elvis. Like, oh, that's nothing. Look what we're doing now. I don't know, because I've seen our culture, our society. I've seen us go to the edge, and we get to the edge, and instead of going over the edge, we pull back. And I've seen this throughout pop culture history. You know, this country was going to the limits with television, with Norman Lear shows about really controversial topics in the 70s. And we didn't go over the edge. What happened? The 80s hit. And The Cosby Show was one of the dominant shows of the 80s. It was a family show. It was about a family. And so we didn't go over the edge. We pulled back. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens here. I mean, I don't think we're going to get to the point where there's full nudity. I think there's going to be a pullback. And, Cardi B and people like that are taking it to the limit. But at some point, there's going to be a regression. We'll see if that does happen. But it's interesting to go back and think about what was so sensitive back then. You couldn't sing "Let's Spend the Night Together." You couldn't sing "Girl, We Couldn't Get Much Higher," and they couldn't show Elvis Presley from the waist down because of his gyrating pelvic area. Thank you for joining me here on the Scoot on the Air YouTube channel. I hope you will become a subscriber. And I'll be on the radio tomorrow. Join me on my radio talk show on WWL. It's WWL in New Orleans. But download the app Odyssey. The app is Odyssey, Audacy, and type in WWL. And I'm on 1 to 4 Central Time, and you've got the show wherever you've got your phone.